when I was a child, I was terrified that I was not good. I was told in church that I was definitely not good because none of us were, but that Jesus would save us and make us good if we prayed the right prayers. And so when I was 5 or 6, after I'd been to an Awana lesson about sin, I got home and I prayed the prayer. And then I prayed it again and again and again and again. I was told that I was broken and lost without Jesus and that getting saved would change my entire life. And I was told that my life after getting saved should look nothing like my life before I got saved. So I prayed the prayer, and nothing changed because I was 5. I was convinced that it meant I had done something wrong. Maybe I had said the wrong words, or maybe I said the right words but not earnestly enough. Maybe I got distracted in the middle of my prayer, which I am prone to do. Maybe God knew I was not thoroughly enough convicted of my sin. I wasn't sure, but I just felt like it hadn't worked, so I kept on praying. And the older I got, the more I felt like a fraud. I had prayed the prayer dozens of times, and each time felt a little bit more phony and a little bit more hopeless. And then I learned about predestination, and I figured that maybe I was just not one of the elect and just needed to come to terms with the fact that I was bound for hell. I wasn't super into that, so phony or not, I kept on trying to get saved every 6 months or so. These prayers were largely fueled by fear and desperation. I was afraid that I was not good enough, and all I ever wanted was to be good enough. I was afraid that I was not chosen, that I was not wanted, that I did not belong. And I think this is what we are all afraid of deep down. We are all afraid that we are not wanted, that we are not enough, that we are not good, that we are not chosen, and that we do not belong. I went to Young Life Camp one summer as an emotionally chaotic teenager, and I prayed again to be saved. And I was really convinced that this time, this was the one that worked because I felt really, really emotional about it. Truth be told, I felt very emotional about just about everything at that stage in my life, so this was really not as telling as I felt like it was. But I still held out hope that this would be the one that really turned things around for me. I was desperate for it to stick. And it didn't. I still did not experience radical day and night transformation, and in fact, things got a lot worse. I was at the very beginning of a decade-long eating disorder paired with some serious depression and anxiety, and as soon as I got home from Young Life Camp, things went downhill really fast. And this was all the proof I needed to know that the prayer had once again not stuck. I'm going to go on a little side quest here that is not super related to my sermon, but just to say that we need to be a lot more honest about things in church. We really like to hear stories with neatly tied up ends. We like to hear about people's struggles as long as those struggles are in the past tense and as long as everything is fixed by Jesus now. And what we often need to hear is that other people struggle too. So full transparency, I still struggle with these things, and I think I always will to some extent. I've gotten a lot better because I've gone to a lot of therapy, and I've got a good doctor and good meds that I will never, ever, ever stop taking. But this is still an issue of mine, and that's okay. I'm not embarrassed by that anymore, and I'm not ashamed of it, and it's okay to talk about hard things here. I remember hearing dramatic testimonies as a child about people who heard the literal voice of God and had encounters with angels and who were transformed on the spot. I remember a man speaking in church on a Sunday night who told this story about how he was living in a doghouse. He was an addict, and he had this encounter where he saw God, heard the voice of God, and was transformed on the spot. All his issues were solved, and he came to tell us about this. And I remember just being envious. I knew from Sunday school that without Jesus, humans were horrible and hopeless and wretched and awful, and I did not want to be those things. I wanted to be saved and made new and turned into something good, but I wasn't even good at doing that. I was no good without Jesus, and I was no good at getting Jesus, so all that was left was hopelessness. But what if I was already good? Not because of a prayer I had prayed, but because that was just how God had made me, good and worthy. So my proposition to you today is this. What if instead of insisting on and clinging to original sin, The idea that humans are inherently and in their truest form broken. As though that was the most important defining characteristic of humanity. What if we clung to the idea of original blessing? The idea that humans and creation are inherently good because that is how God created us to be. What if we taught our children that God loves humanity, that God loves the whole world, and that God delights in creation, including us humans? That we were made by God and called good, and that is who we are. God's good creations who bear the divine image of God. Over the past 15 years or so, the entertainment market has exploded with a slew of origin stories for all of our favorite heroes and villains and storybook characters. Some of these stories have been done and redone again. We have origin stories for characters we didn't even know existed. There are like 67 Marvel origin stories, and I'm sure that we're going to get dozens more over the next decade. And beginnings matter. We care about where people came from, and it matters where people started. The Bible begins with an origin story, too. The first few chapters of Genesis are a poetic origin story about who God is and who we are and what the world is like and how we all relate to one another. And it goes like this. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. And God said, "Let there be a vault between the waters to separate water from water." So God made the vault and separated the water under the vault from the water above it, and it was so. God called the vault sky, and there was evening, and there was morning, the second day. And God said, "Let the water under the sky be gathered to one place, and let dry ground appear," and it was so. God called the dry ground land, and the gathered waters he called seas, and God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants and trees on the land that bear fruit with seed in it, according to their various kinds," and it was so. The land produced vegetation, plants bearing seed according to their kinds, and trees bearing fruit with seed in it according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning, the third day. God said, "Let there be lights in the vault of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them serve as signs to mark sacred times, the days and years. And let them be lights in the vault of the sky to give light on earth," and it was so. God gave two great lights, the greater light to govern the day, the lesser light to govern the night. He made the stars, and God set them in the vault of the sky to give light on the earth, to govern the day and the night, and to separate light from darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and morning, the fourth day. God said, "Let the water teem with living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the vault of the sky." So God created the great creatures of the sea and every living thing in which the water teems, that moves about in it, according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them and said, "Be fruitful and increase in number, and fill the water in the seas. Let the birds increase on the earth." And there was evening and there was morning, the fifth day. God said, "Let the land produce living creatures according to their kinds, the livestock, the creatures that move along the ground, and the wild animals, each according to its kind." And it was so. God made the wild animals according to their kinds, the livestock according to their kinds, and the creatures that move along the ground according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, over all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, and over every living creature that moves on the ground." God said, "I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. And to all the beasts of the earth and all the birds of the sky and all the creatures that move along the ground, everything that has the breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food." And it was so. God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the sixth day. This is a poem about the nature of God, the nature of humanity, and the nature of creation. This is the cornerstone of everything that comes afterwards in the biblical narrative. If we get this part wrong, then everything else that follows afterwards will be off kilter. So often we rush through Genesis 1 and jump right to Genesis 3, which is the fall. and we are wrong to do this. Sin comes into the story later into devastating effect. But before sin is even part of the biblical vernacular, God makes us and breathes life into us and calls us good. Notice the repeated refrain at the end of each day. It was good, 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 it was very good. 7 times that is repeated, and 7 represents perfection in Hebrew literature. The world God made is perfectly good. And I love so much that God's idea of perfection is a garden, which by nature is ever-changing. God's perfection is not static. A garden is not good if it never changes. A garden that never changes is dead. A good garden is ever-growing, ever-evolving, ever-new. A good garden is dynamic and full of change. We must grasp this if we are going to properly understand anything else in the biblical narrative. God made us and breathed life into us, and he calls us good, and this is who we are. This is who we are. And I wonder sometimes how profoundly different our lives would be if we believed this. If we believed that we are, at our very core, deep in our bones, made good like God said. Maybe we could stop trying to prove ourselves. Maybe we could be honest. Maybe we could rest. I think we all desperately want to be good and are simultaneously, paradoxically afraid of believing that we are good. We live in this place of fear and shame, convinced that because we sometimes feel awful about ourselves, that God must feel awful about us too. When goodness is something that we have to grasp, we hold things with tight fists and we fight over scraps. When goodness is something we have to fight for, then you better believe that we will fight. We get greedy and desperate and filled with envy and anger and pride and despair. And all through the Bible, we see examples of how horribly wrong things go when people forget the fundamental truth about God and humanity and creation. Cain kills Abel in a fit of jealous rage. David objectifies and rapes Bathsheba. Abraham uses and abuses Hagar. The people demand an earthly king, forgetting that they already have everything they need, forgetting that earthly power is not where their value lies. When we forget that God is trustworthy and good and that we already inherently have the blessing of the Creator, we take things into our own hands and things often go very, very wrong. If we know our goodness, the way we know the ground beneath our feet, and if we rest in the security that we are at our very core, already made good and loved by God, if we can trust in the truth that we are already worthy simply because God made us so, then we can be honest about our faults and our failures without the fear that they make us failures. If we trust what God says about us, that we are made on purpose and with purpose, and that we are good, then we can let down our defenses and stop trying so hard to convince ourselves and everyone else of our worth. You do not have worth because you have earned it. You do not have worth because of the things you have accomplished. You do not have worth because of how respected you are or because of all the good things you do. You have worth because it is woven right into your DNA. You have worth deep down in your bones just because you exist. You have worth because that is simply who you are, worthy. I think believing this would also change how we interact with other people. We spend a lot of time in the church trying to convince people of their brokenness and then using this guilt to convince them to repent and follow Jesus. And I have never in my life met somebody who does not already know their brokenness. Even the most arrogant people I know are often desperately, sometimes obnoxiously trying to compensate for extreme insecurity and doubt. The most arrogant people are usually, almost always, the most cripplingly insecure and afraid. They are convinced deep down that they are not enough, so they try desperately to convince the world that they are. I have never known anyone who needed to be convinced that they were broken. But I have known hundreds of people who need to be convinced that they are good and loved. I'm in no way trying to minimize the seriousness of sin. I'm not at all arguing that sin doesn't matter. It doesn't take long to see the evidence of brokenness all around us. We have all experienced the effects of sin and brokenness in the world. As I look around this sanctuary and as I wrote this sermon, I see and I thought of many beloved friends who have felt the very real cost of sin. Sin costs us our peace, it costs us our joy, it costs us our relationships and our communities and our ability to trust. Sin hurts us, it hurts others, and sin hurts the world. Sin is serious. Sin is true and sin is costly, but sin is not the truest thing about us. The ways that we fail are not who we are. I am convinced that the first things that we learn about God matter a whole heck of a lot. If we learn fear and shame, then we will live in fear and shame. The things that we are taught to hold as a child are hard to pry out of our hands by the time we reach adulthood. If we teach our children that they are wretched, they will believe it. If we learn that God hates humanity and is barely restraining himself from slaughtering us, then we will learn to hate humanity too. I saw a tweet recently by a very popular preacher that said something along the lines of, "You better be thankful every single morning that God did not kill you in your sleep like you deserve." And I'm paraphrasing, but yikes. We have this idea that God is filled with contempt and barely restraining himself from killing us, filled with disgust. And that belief is so harmful and not at all representative of how God feels about us. I remember reading Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God by Jonathan Edwards, who's a Puritan minister, when I was in 10th grade to accompany our reading at school of The Crucible. And he likens humanity to a spider that God is dangling over the flames, saying, "The God that holds you over the pit of hell, much as one holds a spider or some loathsome insect over the fire, abhors you." And in my research leading up to this sermon, I came across something called worm theology, which is the idea that humans are wretched worms, disgusting and vile, and just generally gross until Jesus saves us and makes us into something less disgusting. Ironically, I think God is probably pro-worm. God made worms, and worms are pretty awesome, so I sincerely doubt God is as disgusted by worms as this school of theology would like to imply. God is firmly team worm. But you understand the analogy the writer was trying to make. Humans are horrible, worthless, evil. This is so often how we think of ourselves too. We see the writers of the Bible refer to humans this way sometimes too. We've had this issue with self-loathing for a long time. I remember hearing a truly bizarre theological argument once from a man who was convinced that the existence of babies was proof of man's inherent sin nature. "Think of babies," he said. "They're the epitome of selfishness. All they think about is themselves. If they're hungry, nothing else in the world matters, and they scream until they get what they want. We are sinful creatures straight from the womb." Now, his delivery was, in hindsight, a little bit comical, but I have found that this belief, that the truest thing about us is our brokenness, is prevalent in the evangelical circles I have been in. When we look to the example of Jesus, the truest depiction of God we have ever received, far surpassing any teachings on God that came before or after, we do not see him speak about humanity with a sort of anger or hate or disgust or wrath that we so frequently ascribe to God. Jesus came to show us who God is. Jesus is exactly who God is, no more, no less. In the words of A.M. Ramsey, God is Christ-like. In him there is no un-Christ-likeness at all. So if we wonder what God thinks of us, look to Jesus. That could be the answer to a lot of questions. Look to Jesus. What is God like? Look to Jesus. How does God love us? Look to Jesus. How should we live? Look to Jesus. And Jesus came full of love and self-sacrifice and grace and forgiveness. This is who God is. If there is anger in God, it is the anger of a good parent when someone tries to hurt their child. Not unbridled wrath and hate, not disgust, not contempt. The anger of a protector, and we are his children. We are his beloved children, all of us, all of humanity. He made us and he called us good, and that is who we are. I'm trying to instill these things in my children in the rare moments that I'm not just endlessly picking goldfish crackers out of the carpet and putting on shoes over and over and over and over again. Eloise likes to hear about when she was made, so I tell her the story of creation. When we get to the human part, I say, "And then God said, something is missing." And her eyes light up. And she says, "It's me, Eloise." And I say, "Yes. Then God made you, Eloise. And when he made you and when he saw you, do you know what he said?" And she says, "Oh, Eloise, you are so good and beautiful. Eloise, I love you." And this is how God thinks of us. He delights in us like the parent of a newborn baby. When Benjamin leaves for school in the morning, the last thing we say to each other is this. I grab his face in my hands, and I say, "Be brave." And he responds, "I am a child of God." And then I say, be kind, and he responds, so is everyone else. And then we wrap things up with As You Wish to pay tribute to the greatest movie in all of time and space, but I digress. This is how we ought to live, bravely in the knowledge that we are the very good, beautiful, beloved children of God. Kindly, remembering that everyone else is also a good, beloved child of God. No matter what life has dealt you, no matter how royally you may have screwed things up, this will not change. You are still made by God, and God called you good. Remind yourself of that this week. When you are prone to self-loathing, remember that you are made and known and loved by the Creator of the universe. The God that made the Milky Way, the Grand Canyon, the Northern Lights, made you and called you very good. Believe it.
I'm going to close with a benediction and one closing thought as you leave. May the peace of the Lord Christ go with you wherever he may send you. May he guide you through the wilderness. May he protect you through the storm. May he bring you home rejoicing at the wonders that he has shown you. May he bring you home rejoicing once again into our doors. I want you to leave with a spring in your step and one thought on your mind. There are lots of differences between us, different ages, all sorts of differences. There's one thing that we all have in common. Every single one of us bears the image of God. God bless you, and I'll see you next week.